is an endangered species.
Hello, Mirit Hendrickson here, and I'm super excited to have John Goodwin on the show. I'm going to have to read you his bio because it's so good that I would do it no justice if I didn't read it. So John Goodwin, who's an old friend of mine from Los Angeles and is coming to you from Los Angeles today, is the longtime president of Galaxy Press. He's been involved in the book publishing business since 1986, publishing all the fiction works of best-selling author L. Ron Hubbard, which includes the internationally acclaimed Writers of the Future anthology, now completing its 37th year. So John is currently a board member of the Friends of Hollywood Central Park, and he's the president of the Hollywood Christmas Parade and an honorary commander with the United States Space Force. Pretty amazing. And he's been a board member of the Audio Publishers Association, a national organization of the audio publishing industry, and a board member of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. He's a member of the Amazing Explorers Club, Science Fiction Writers of America, Mystery Writers of America, and Western Writers of America. So with that huge introduction, I'm going to bring on John Goodwin.
Hi,
John.
Hi, Marie.
Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. I feel like I haven't seen you in years since the last time that I was in LA.
It's been definitely a while. I remember we did this one little workshop at Celebrity Center where you were the, we were going over how to talk about various things with LRH as an author. And that's about the last time we actually had any definite time together. So it's really nice seeing you again now.
Yes, absolutely. That was years ago. So John, I know that you've done interviews as long as 3 hours about this, but we're gonna be doing about 30 minutes.
Okay.
First of all, what makes Battlefield Earth so popular? Because it's about to be promoted on Amazon's Book of the Day, and it's been a best-selling book. What is it that makes this book so popular?
Well, there's various things about it. One is, and I pulled it up so I could just have it here too, is that what Mr. Hubbard did when he wrote it, he said it is a story of how mankind could survive and why. And this is something that is really important. And throughout the years since it was originally published back in '82, there's been a lot of traumas. There's been various situations globally, and right now we have the current pandemic. And people like something where they can have an underlying sense that overall we will survive. And what L. Ron Hubbard really promotes in this book is that it's the human spirit of humanity which ultimately prevails when you've got the biggest enemy galactically. There's a new word that has caused every other race in civilizations across multiple universes to succumb. And it's the human spirit that ultimately brings about the triumphant regaining of the planet.
That's actually so awesome, especially in the middle of what's happening today with the pandemic and so much of the planet changing and how we operate in life. It actually seems kind of perfect for this time.
It is. And there's another factor too. When the book first came out in the 80s, you had that generation, and it was very, very popular. It became a New York Times best-selling book as a hardback, and then when it came out as a paperback, it was a New York Times best-selling book then too, with multiple languages. You had a lot of people that became very enamored with L. Ron Hubbard as a best-selling author. He wrote this in celebration of 50 years with the Muse. His first story that he published in 1932, or actually it wasn't a story, it was the first article in the Sportsman Pilot. And now 50 years later, he was celebrating his triumphant return to fiction. But that generation, as they grew up, they had their kids who they said, you need to read, they'd go, okay, little Johnny, you need to read this book. This is great, when they turn 12, 13, 14. And then now you got a third generation and they're saying, okay, we've got people at conventions when we were going to conventions prior to the pandemic, would just walk in, fans would walk in from the aisle, they just see our booth and they come in and see someone looking at the book and they go, that's a great book, you need to read it. So it's got 3 generations of supporters now who continue to promote it. And that's why we call it a perennial bestseller.
That's awesome. And if I'm not mistaken, it was written based on an anniversary, right? Yeah, that's his 50th anniversary as a writer. And he was, in the 30s and 40s, he was one of America's most popular writers of pulp fiction. And in the 40s, he was pulled in by the biggest publishing house, Street and Smith, and told him about a new magazine that they were bringing to life, Astounding Science Fiction. It had earlier incarnations that weren't doing so well. And he was very well known because of his venture writing with his dealing with people. And the problem with science fiction at that time was that there weren't people. It was very machine heavy. And so you got robots and ray guns, but they wanted to have people in there. So that's when he came in, and his first story was A Dangerous Dimension, which was a whole different take on science fiction. And so, as he says then, it wasn't called the golden age of science fiction at that time. It was just a lot of heavy duty create happening in a genre that went from being something that was frowned upon to where it is now, mainstream fiction that people, it's the biggest selling genre for Hollywood, that's for certain. So in 50 years later, he did it in 1982. He published Battlefield Earth in celebration of the 50 years with the Muse. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Now, I have a question. I have the book at home and the unabridged audio. Yes. That audio is like nothing else. An enormous amount of work went into it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Sure. We've got, obviously, there's the audiobook here we came out with first as CDs, and then it's on Audible. It's been one of their best-selling audiobooks that they've had since we launched it in 2016. We also did something that's really, really cool. This is a flash drive. It's got all 47.5 hours of the unabridged audiobook there, but it's got 67 actors, over 150,000 sound effects, and we literally created it so it would be like a movie of the mind. So with all these actors and sound effects going on, you're listening to the audio almost like in real time. And because the sound effects are so authentic, the humans are with natural sound effects, and the aliens go through a computer, a bit of a computer change to it so that they sound alien. So it takes a person through that. And if a sound effect didn't exist, it was created. So you've got these various things that are happening that are like, wow, that sounds so real. And so we've gotten over the years, truckers and drivers saying, I missed my exit because I was listening to this thing here. People that say, yeah, I was in my driveway just waiting till that section was over before I turned off the car and went in the house. It's just one of those things. And it won the Audie Award. We released it, this unabridged book, in 2016, which is also when we released the trade paperback. So we had both the audiobook and the trade paperback. They both hit #1 in the US the week that they released. Wow. I think I bought it when it first came out. I didn't realize it went #1 within the first week, though. It was #1. Yeah. And we also, part of the release, we crashed a spaceship on Hollywood Boulevard. That had never been done before. So we shut down Hollywood Boulevard, crashed a spaceship. It was covered by all the major media, all networks covered it. So that was a real fun day. And it got a lot of pickup, all over the US. And so that definitely helped a lot to make it newly visible in front of everybody. And so the word of mouth coupled with that just helped it to take off. That's awesome. And I'm sure something to do with the approvals of crashing that on Hollywood Boulevard had to do with that you're on the Chamber of Commerce for a long time. I mean, Hollywood is kind of your backyard. Exactly. It definitely paid off at that point there. And, we do a lot to help Hollywood. That's, like I said, why we took on doing the Hollywood Christmas Parade, is because it pays back to Hollywood. And I like to celebrate the Hollywood that I admire and I appreciate. So that's why we do it. And we're the green room, and we have several hundred celebrities in here every year. But it's something that, it definitely paid off when we released Battlefield Earth. And because of my involvement with the Audio Publishers Association, they were very excited when I got the call that we won
And even when we went to the awards event, the awards ceremony in New York, I had this fellow, Turl. He's the main villain, the main bad guy in there. We had a bodysuit that was created for part of the promotion. And so we had him there. And so he rushed the stage that was being presented. Nobody knew he was coming. And he ripped the trophy out of my hand and ran away. So that continued to create more stir for it. And just a lot of people really enjoy it. It's such a fun book. It's such a fun book. And
I take it you've read it more than once.
Yes.
Okay. That was an obvious answer.
Yes.
Now, John, I have a question. I don't have a publishing book background, but I can only imagine that 2020 with the pandemic and everything that's happening has changed a lot of things about the publishing of books or the releasing of books. I mean, there's a lot of book fairs that usually happen around the world. They're huge conventions and things of that sort. How has publishing changed now that the pandemic has been going on and on for months?
Well, the most obvious thing is that there's no groups allowed. So all the big conventions where we were able to do a lot of one-on-one sales, one-on-one briefings, getting people. We did a lot of media at these conventions at San Diego Comic-Con, Salt Lake City FanX, Atlanta Dragon Con, and several other ones. Those are the main ones. And we always had people coming up talking about it and getting copies, getting the next copies. A lot of people didn't know that in this book here, there's the interview that Mr. Hubbard did in 1983. And then what's one thing that's really cool too, and I realize I'm not exactly answering your question yet, but I got to say it because it's
that's
so
okay.
Cool. Is we also added in the back of this book a section with these are Mr. Hubbard's handwritten notes as he was making as he's writing Battlefield Earth. So we got here's the typed, and then here's the handwritten notes. We had several of those in there, and there's stuff that you wouldn't know. It's not in the book, but it's the background data that part of what makes the book so defensible in terms of the technology of it, the science of it, is that he shows how the mass system of the cyclos came about, how it works. And people are like, wow, I had no idea. But not to answer your question.
Yes.
We don't have the ability to do that now. So we're relying a lot more on social. So I'm very visible right now on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, doing a lot of just creating videos. So that's when we do a lot of green screen stuff. We've also done a lot of interviews with fans, talking about why they liked the book, what was good about it, their favorite parts. We've had some other people talk about how they've shared with other people. So we do that. We rely on that a lot. There's been a few of the events, like San Diego Comic-Con was an online event. Not so impressive in terms of the results. It was like people trying to get in, like, what do we do now? How do we do this thing here? So there's Dragon Con coming up in about a month and a half.
Which is also online? When you say okay, which is a little awkward, right? I mean, no offense. I know we're all doing our best. I'm online with you, but it's not the same as being around people.
For sure. And that's when you can, like, we like people, we like to talk to people. And so it's nice to be able to say, hey, come over here and you just can I show you this? And I've heard about that. So people aren't necessarily, inclined to originate communication. We are, so we're very open with that. So we talk to people, and because our booth is always full, other people go, well, what is this? What's happening over here? And so people are just interested. We have this huge stack that we start off with Battlefield Earth, and by the end of the show, it's sold out. So that's something that's really good. So we've had to rely on this. Also, what's good too is we invariably get a lot of media. A lot of TV comes and covers us. I'm able to go and do TV stations talking about the success of Battlefield Earth, the success of L. Ron Hubbard as an author, the success of his Writers of the Future competition. So that makes a big difference too, that we don't have that. So we've had to kind of like roll with the punches. We started doing with Writers of the Future several online book signings, and we're selling a dozen books at an event, and it's good. And the bookstores like it a lot because everybody's just kind of like, what do we do now? So that's kind of like we're doing it now. So we're relying upon the online, and I'm very happy that when you contact me to do this interview, because I'm hoping that people will get more aware of it and they'll take this. But what's important is the next step of this is we do this interview, but then for people who like it, to share it to their people. So we have that grassroots continuing on Battlefield Earth.
Absolutely. Not to mention those, and many people that I know already own the book or several copies of the book, but now purchasing a copy for a friend, introducing somebody new to this, so that we're not all stuck on social media and on our phones all day long during the pandemic, but are actually back to reading books and going for walks and doing things that are, I guess, a little bit of a more extroverting medium than just being on screens all day long.
Yeah. And I've been doing a lot. I handle all the social media for Battlefield Earth and for L. Ron Hubbard. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and as well as Galaxy Press, Writers of the Future, and others. But that's
a lot of accounts.
Yes, yes. And a lot of times when I tell people, are you aware of this, the audiobook? And they no. So I give them a little 20-minute clip that they can listen to, and then they end up getting it either on Audible, or they go to Amazon or come to the Galaxy Press store to get the audiobook and listen to it, because it's 47.5 hours long. And it's which is amazing, but that's a lot of walks.
That's a lot, but it's not, or in the car,
or in the car, or right? It's a lot of vacuuming of your room.
No kidding. And by the way, this audio is actually not expensive at all from what I recall when I purchased it.
No, you can get this flash drive is $35, which you can plug into anything. It's a USB, or you can get it on Audible. It's 1 credit. It's just amazing. So you can get for 1 credit or for $35, or if you prefer the CDs, you can get that too. That's a bit more expensive, but we have all the different formats available.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I have a question for people that are newbies and are just getting either introduced to this genre, or what would you recommend as a first book? Would this be a first book for them or something else?
Well, the main thing with Battlefield Earth, I can show you like this, but then I can also show you like this. And some people go like, whoa, that's a lot of words. And it is. It's a lot of words. It's interesting how people, once they get over being intimidated by it, go like, I have never experienced something that just pulled me through. I couldn't put it down. Kevin Anderson, one of our judges for Writers of the Future and himself a best-selling author in the Dune series, called it like an Indiana Jones. It was just, he got tired reading it because he was so worn out, because it was just like he couldn't stop. He had to keep on turning the page. It was so like adrenaline pumping throughout the whole book. And so some people will find that they can't put it down once they get started. So that's a really good book to start if you've not read any of Mr. Hubbard's science fiction. But he wrote all the genres. He wrote mystery, he wrote Westerns, he wrote obviously science fiction. He was very well known with his fantasy works. His horror fear is one of the mainstays in the horror psychological thriller genres. Even Stephen King says it's one of the best ever written. And so depending what kind of genre you like too, there's something for everybody. And if you go to galaxypress.com, we actually have there like, where do I start? That's one of our pages, because people kind of go, how do I start with him? So that gives a bit of a heads up of where to go to start if you want to discover L. Ron Hubbard as an author. The thing about him, if you're not familiar with him as an author, he did a lot of research. He traveled all over the world. And so the realism that he was able to add to his stories is what made him a standout author during the 30s and 40s. And then as he continued his research into the mind, into the various peoples of Earth, and when he released Dynamics in 1950 and later his discoveries in Scientology in the few years later, the return to his science fiction in 1982 with Battlefield Earth, and then the year later with Mission Earth, which will probably be the subject of another show, was something that the actors, when they recorded this, they said he speaks with such realism that they don't, sometimes with the actors, they feel compelled to want to change the voice or the words or the language of the characters and dialogue. And he said, I don't have to do this anything. And this is all the characters, whether they're from Scotland or from various parts of the United States, from Africa, and in Mission Earth even became more evident with all the countries involved with that, that he had such realism that that's what makes his stories continue to be so sellable, so pertinent, so real. And now with the stories from the Golden Age, when we released them a few years ago, middle school students are very much enamored with them because they are PG rated. You don't have to use profanity and sex in the story to make a good sell. They're just real. So that's something he was able to add that so few other authors have been able to do. And so he's able to transcend time. Even though they're written in the 30s and 40s, they're still very much what people do and say now, in the 21st century.
So it's basically as relevant today as it's always been. As interesting and relevant. It's not outdated in any way, shape, or form. That's
right. And just as a point, again, a little bit of sidebar here. We recently released a Writers of the Future online workshop. And in it, we've got essays from Orson Scott Card, Tim Powers, and David Farland, 3 of our Writers of the Future judges, and all 3 of themselves international best-selling authors. But we also include 11 essays by L. Ron Hubbard that he wrote back in the 30s and 40s. And it's amazing how the response to the 3,500 plus people taking this online course right now have talked about how relevant his essays that he wrote back then still are to this day. And they talk about his one essay on art and more about it. I was like, wow, I had no idea. That is brilliant what he had to say about it. So it's you say, oh yeah, of course that's L. Ron Hubbard, but it is L. Ron Hubbard. This is what he's like. This is what he does, and that's why his stories are so appreciated by so many people in so many countries to this day.
That's incredible. And by the way, only because you mentioned on it, but I don't know that everybody's going to know necessarily 100% what it is. Number one, can you just briefly explain what Writers of the Future is? Because I've been to a bunch of Writers of the Future events. I know what they are. I've purchased the books, but not everybody has. And now you guys have an online course, which I'm not exactly sure when you started, but it's become very popular. Is it free? Does it cost money? Can you give a little bit of data about that?
Gladly. We launched the course in April. We recorded the Tim, Scott, and Dave back in November. And so we put the whole thing together and launched it in April. And it was amazing. We were hoping to be able to get, maybe 500 or 1,000 by the end of the year. And we broke 1,000 people taking the course within the first 48 hours. It was like an instant.
500 people?
What's that?
You broke how many? 500?
We broke 1,000 people in the first 48 hours.
That's incredible.
It was. And we're now over 3,500. Maybe it's in the next, I'm not sure, it's 3,700, 3,800. It just continues to grow by about 100 or so every week. And we've got over 55 countries now with people participating in it. Several from Turkey, from Iran, Philippines, throughout the Middle East. A lot in Africa right now are taking advantage of this. It is free to enter. You can go at your own pace. You go to writersofthefuture.com. And there you can see on the left bar, you can navigate and see some of the welcome videos and then sign up for it. And you can, depending upon, how familiar you are with writing, you can take, as little or as long as you want to. And even once you've gone through, you can go back and do it again. It's just going to be up there for people to do and go back to. There's transcripts for all the essays. So people where English is a second language really appreciate that because they watch it and then they can actually follow along with the transcript. And then, of course, the L. Ron Hubbard essays are, the PDFs, you can print them off. And it works the person through the steps of writing a short story. So at the very end, they can submit to Writers of the Future, which is a competition L. Ron Hubbard set up right after releasing Battlefield Earth. And once his name came back in the limelight as a science fiction author, he launched this competition, L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future, which is now completing its 37th year. So there we published 12 new writers and 12 new illustrators who have not been professionally published in the past. And they get an amazing welcome to the science fiction and fantasy world. It's blind judging so that the entries are submitted. The contest administrator takes the name off and assigns a number to it. And that's what the judges see. They either read the story with a number assigned to it, or they see the art with a number assigned to it. So then when it comes back saying, these are the ones we've selected, we then find out who they are, where they're from. At the end of the first quarter, it was an interesting phenomenon. The first time, all 3 writer winners and all 3 illustrator winners were female. That's never happened before. We have 2 winners so far this year from Utah. And we've usually had a lot from there because we have our judges, Scott Card, Dave Farland, and Brandon Sanderson, who are
from Utah, right?
From Utah. So we get a lot of support there from BYU, Brigham Young University. They're very supportive. So that's what it is. It's free to enter. It's been around for a long time. It's open to anybody. There's no age restriction. With the oldest entrant we've had that we know of is 102 years old. So it's just anybody that wants to be able to do that. The worst that's going to happen is you'll get an email back saying, thank you very much for entering the contest. Please resubmit. Some people have entered almost 50 times before winning. Sometimes they've entered several times and they pro out. Like Kevin Anderson entered 17 times. And then he got good enough that he's just started selling professionally. And then after selling 3 short stories professionally or 1 novel, then he disqualified himself. Robert Sawyer pro'd out, Brandon Sanderson pro'd out, Joe Hill. So there's a lot of people who have entered the contest that never won, but then had their start or were able to get their feet wet into the field of science fiction, fantasy, and light horror because of this competition created by L. Ron Hubbard, and which he continues to fund. So he put that in his will to make sure this goes on. It's an important thing to validate this, and science fiction is the last genre that he was writing in before he launched Dianetics, and because it's the herald of possibility. He saw that in science fiction writers, they postulate they can postulate a very positive future, and that's what they do.
That's awesome. And John, thank you, because I feel like I just want to close it off and say that with today, schools being shut down and so much of our economy being shut down, where I feel like once long ago, education was much more valued than it is today. To at least have this platform and free online courses to offer people is quite a gift, especially with everything that's happening. So thank you so much for your time today. And we definitely should do a next one on Mission Earth.
That would be great. And I would like to recommend anybody watching this, visit us at galaxypress.com. That's where we have our online bookstore. You can see everything. It has the history of L. Ron Hubbard as a fiction author, as well as all the library we have available. And then obviously writersofthefuture.com, where you can find out about that competition, enter the contest, and see the amazing judges that we have, both writers and artists.
Perfect. We'll make sure to tag all those links as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hope to see you soon.
I hope to see you as well. Thanks, Mirit.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Man is an endangered species.